City Council for June 13th session. Roll call, please.
Council President, Mr. Arcaro,
Present.
Mr. Emery,
Yes, here.
Mr. Goff,
Here.
Mr. Kozowski,
Here. Here.
here, Mr. Moiseo,
Here.
Mr. Prokowski,
Present.
City Manager, Mr. Hockaday, and Inspector, Mr. Williams.
Here. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have two sets of minutes that need approval. We'll begin with minutes of May 23rd, 2022. Are there any alterations or corrections? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
The meeting minutes for May 23rd, 2022 are approved. We also have meeting minutes for a special meeting of June 6th, 2022. Are there any alterations or corrections? Well, there's nothing to be said about them. Motion?
Make a motion, Mr. Arcaro.
Seconded.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
yes,
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, special meeting minutes for June 6 are approved. Moving on, we have an awards presentation this evening, and with us in council chambers is Emma Van Norman, our Spartan of the Month. If you'd like to come forward with your family, right over here. So Connell, if you could read the certificate into the record, please.
Certificate of Achievement, Spartan of the Month. The Spartan of the Month for June is Emma Van Norman. Emma is a ninth grade student at Conneaut High School. Emma was nominated by Student Council Advisor Carrie McKinley, who stated, Emma is the freshman class vice president. The freshman class has had several fundraising efforts this year so they can sponsor the homecoming dance next fall, and Emma has been a huge help with these various events. She goes above and beyond and is always willing to help. Outside of school, Emma is a dancer at the Ashtabula Arts Center and recently performed in the spring dance recital, Celestial Seasons. Her dedication to both dance and her academics, as well as her involvement in school activities, makes her a true Spartan. Signed this 13th day of June by council members Moiseo and Emery.
Yes. Would you like to introduce your family? Congratulations.
This is my mom, Cheryl. It's my brother Ethan and my dad.
good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, moving on to citizen comments. Does anybody have any citizen comments? Hearing none. Communications?
I have none this evening.
Does council have any communications? Okay. Moving on to reports of the administration, beginning with the city manager, Mr. Hockaday.
Thank you, Council President Arcaro. A couple of quick updates tonight on some of our projects. The Conneaut Creek Dredge Material Facility is inching closer to the finish line here. We have a couple documents to finish up for the Ohio EPA, and we're ironing out an understanding regarding ODNR dam safety permit requirements. for the facility. once we have these couple of items, we'll be ready to actually publish the bid documents. We will cover that with council before we set anything out to bid. So you all have the same or better understanding than anybody else in the public. So you're familiar with the project, its timeline, its scope. And we'll go from there. So this will be, even though it'll be two separate items, there's a section at state capital dollars, about $5.9 million, and a section of ARPA funding routed through the EPA for another $9 million for a total of about 14.9. That will be dealt with. Complicated, and we just want to make sure that you guys understand everything about that before it finally hits the street. Route 20 Waterline Phase 2, that project is substantially completed. It's in service. We're doing some of the closeout stuff. There's a couple punch list items that need to be dealt with. And then there's always the Forever Fund closeout documentation for the grant itself and reimbursement requests that we're in the process of submitting for that project. Went pretty smoothly. Overall, a couple little issues that were unanticipated, but overall it went well. The water treatment filtration improvements, and I think we ought to do a field trip, one work session, and go down there so you guys can actually see what's being done. They've completed filter bed 1 of 4, so they'll have 3 more filter beds that they need to reconstruct here over the course of the summer. But most of the low lift improvements are completed, though there's a couple that they're still working on the hillside piece. We are leaving that gate closed for the exhibition of construction activity. So if anybody wonders why that gate is closed and locked at all times, it's because of that construction. We just want to be safe. Center Road Bridge Deck, that was completed June 10th and reopened to traffic. So Center Road is back open. You can see the intermediate course. They finished it through the downtown to the Viaduct Bridge today. I'm going to assume that their next step is going to be flipping past the full depth repair. They are down by the plaza and heading all the way to the infill line. That fill and fill will likely start up here very shortly, and then any of the sidewalk adjustments and concrete work will be taking place throughout the downtown here over the next couple of weeks. Once that's done, the final course of asphalt will come in. I know we get a lot of questions about, well, the manholes are still too high. Well, there's another 1.5 inches of asphalt that goes on top of it. And even at the end of that, they individually adjust the manholes, just as they did on East 20 and Broad Street, Lake Road last year. If you recall, they see those kind of circular hole cuts around each of those manholes. So those castings will be cut out. If they're in poor shape, they're replaced at the time. The city does have the castings on hand for any of our utilities like stormwater or sewer. The bad casting, we replace that casting at the time of resurfacing. So we get that question a lot. I just want to kind of repeat it for everybody's edification. If somebody does ask, yes, that does change at the end of the project. So sewer lining project, they are finishing up some of their lining pieces here. I don't know if you've seen their trucks. They were out here today down by the Y doing some sections in there. That'll be relatively rapid. They've already done some of it, but they're completing it. They were trying to work around some of the paving project happening at the same time. Broad Street reconstruction with Madison Street. The first thing that people will see on this project is the demo of the big building that's at the corner of Madison and Buffalo there. It used to be a big quadplex apartment. The bids came back in, the county bid those, the County Community Services and Planning, Don Gates' office did that. It will probably be awarded this week and go into demolition immediately after that. So we look forward to that kind of taking some shape. I think I errantly jumped over Buffalo Street sewer boring and lining project. That's before council's night for an authorization to bid. So while that's out for construction, we'll actually close that railroad crossing at Buffalo Street. Once we have a final timeline, we'll advertise that closure at the time. And then this demolition will occur, and then the Madison Street improvements will be the next phase after that. The Madison street improvements are under design right now. This will include some additional on-street parking on the south side of the library. It will include an improved turn radius there for the Broad Street, Madison Street, so the trucks for the US Postal Service can actually make that turn more easily. It will also include some streetscaping elements. And then separately, not necessarily involving council, the library is going to be putting a little expansion in for their facilities. They're in design on that as well. So that project is moving along. Couple other things I have attached in here. We talked about the bids for the residential properties. I included this bid tab here. Sorry, I did not hit color on it, but the ones that are a little darker gray than the other ones are the apparent low bids. So we have a couple of things to tie off, and then we'll make a formal recommendation to council at the end of the month for award of these. And then those can move into demolition. They're dealt with as 4 separate contracts. There are the residential properties, and then there are 3 commercial properties that are individually identified. So there will be 4 separate contracts with each of these. Okay. Let me know if there's any questions on that, and when we get to the final bid summary, we'll share that with council and recommendation. The last thing I wanted to, well, 2 things before I jump off this main sheet here. We have the Soapbox Derby prep this week. Just a reminder, we'll be closing portions of Broad Street and the underpass while we do that, so we can dress up the road there a little bit this weekend for the Soapbox Derby. We have had kind of a, it always runs in fits and spurts, but we've had quite a few water breaks this year. We continue to see those. We have one down on the dock coming, one here on Route 20 in Harbor, which would be probably related to the milling down of that surface, but they did get it repaired before they did the intermediate course. And we had one over on Lard. And then the other thing I want to bring up is we are kind of in the process of trying to deal with a bunch of dead water meters that we've had. We've had a lot of difficulty sourcing meters from Neptune. We've had back orders that go back probably almost 18 months. Some of those are starting to be fulfilled, and we're getting kind of some of those shipments of meters in. Right now in the system, we estimate approximately 200 dead meters in the system. As you know, dead meters don't spin, so they go on their prior billing cycle. It's an estimate until it's replaced. It's usually lower than what they're actually consuming. So it's to the city's interest to have those replaced as soon as possible. I know Skip is kind of devising a plan to rapidly replace as many of those meters as he can as that inventory comes to us. I think all of last year we ordered probably close to 100 meters, and I think we got like 20 in from suppliers. So it's very difficult, and they don't have them to ship to us, and everybody's in the same boat. So we're not unique in this experience. I'm just making you aware of it. The other thing is we moved to a formal software a couple of years ago that was in conjunction with the county building office. And one of the reasons we accepted that software was in conjunction with the county building office. We could share permitting information directly with them. Ultimately, the county ended up moving away from that software. We weren't super thrilled with it. Our contract was up with them. It was a cloud-based software. So Molly was able to get a new system up online called iWorks. It seems to be a little more robust system. We spent the first 2 months, the first quarter of this year, getting it up and running and kind of implementing some protocols for everybody. But I wanted to share with you some of these reports. I'm happy to share with you on kind of a monthly basis now what their activities are. And I think it's worthwhile. So you can kind of see a code enforcement. These are either complaints or observations just for the month of June. So these are issues resolved in the month of June. So 6/1 to 6/13. As you can see, there's 63 active or closed cases that they've dealt with, anything from furniture on the tree lawn, a burned out van, litter, a lot of grass complaints that come in this time of year. So those get kicked over to the grass mowing system. So approximately 63 complaints in the first 13 days of the month that they've handled there. And you can kind of see the nature of the issue and its disposition. I did also provide you the zoning permits that they've issued. And these range from anything from a commercial permit to rental inspections to vacant structures. I think there's a logging one in there. So and it gives you kind of their status, their application status, whether it's been received and approved, and all told about 34 different zoning permit issues in there. And then I wanted to give you a summary going back to the beginning of the year of total number of permits issued from that office. And they're up to about 76 permits for the beginning 50% of the year. So we're about halfway through the year and they're sitting at about 76 total permits for this year in the zoning office. And then, this is the time of year we get lots of grass complaints, and we'll continue to get those grass complaints. I just want to make sure everybody knows, there's a period of time for which grass mowing and complaints are quote unquote in season, starting in April. We usually try not to do any citations in April, just because, grass is either just starting to grow or people are just trying to get their contractors out there. So usually this stuff really doesn't start hard until the beginning of May, give people that opportunity to have a nice weather day to get out there and get stuff taken care of. You can see there's a letter, what letters were sent. So on page 1 here, you have letters just sent on May 5th. And I don't know, it looks like about 20 or so letters there. And that is after the publication. We've observed the property, we've photographed the property, we've sent a written notice to the property owner. We waited 5 days as required by ordinance. The inspector then went back out there. They re-observed the property, whether it had already been mowed by the owner or if it had not been mowed, and then it gets generated and it goes to the grass mowing. So you can see their activities, on a weekly basis with grass mowing and observing grass mowing properties. There's quite a bit of work considering the multi-step process that they have to go through, in addition to some of their other responsibilities that I've already previously covered here. So you can kind of see where that is. And you can see quite a few people do respond. The owner gets out there and gets the lawn mowed. If there's another subsequent complaint, we start over. They have to go back out, they have to photograph it, they have to, send the notice, et cetera, and the whole process starts over. So I just wanted to give that to you as kind of a summation. I think zoning does a great job. I have a lot of confidence in Molly and Jennifer O'Connell in that office. I think they're doing fantastic work, and I feel like it's a true improvement for the city to have made the investment in the personnel resources in that office. And this is some of that evidence, I think, of the hard work that they've put into this and made it certainly for a better office. I'm going to stop there, and any questions that council has, I'm happy to answer.
I have one on the Route 20 project. So turn radius, that maybe that was a no-go.
They didn't want to change the plans. And that involves a much deeper process of having to realign the whole curb structure, and they would want to redraft on the plans.
Any other questions for the city manager? Okay, if not, move on to the finance director, Mr. Williams.
Provided council some information concerning the street improvement levy. As you know, the levy expires this year, but it will still collect into 2023. But we'll have to have that back on the ballot here, either in November of this year. We have twice next year to get it on for collection in 2024. So the current millage on the levy is 2.75, which at full millage would generate about 558,000 per year. The problem is we have reduction factors, and that's where whoever votes for a levy at any point in time will never pay more than they did in the first year. So you have reduction factors. So as the valuation increases in the city, they continue to pay the same amount that they voted for in that year. So right now, the effective millage is down to 2.59. So it's currently generating about 527,000. So at our public works meeting, we talked about, options for increasing a mill, 2 mills, and then 2.25 mills. So if you look at the first one for a $100,000 home, and I just looked at this today, they said the average value of a home in Conneaut is about 95,000. I didn't confirm that with the county. I tried, they didn't have the information, but let's just assume it's 100,000. Currently, somebody with a $100,000 home is paying about $8 a month on the current levy. Now, if you increase it by a mill, you would pay an additional monthly tax of $2.92 a month. If you go 2 mills at 4.75, which would generate 964,000 roughly, that they would pay an additional $5.83 per month. If you went all the way up to 5 mills, which is the 2.25, they would pay $6.56 per month more for that. And that would generate about $1 million or a little over $1 million. As I said, right now we're at 527,000. It's clearly inadequate in light of the cost of asphalt and just the size of our city, 27 square miles, all the roads that we have. It's just, it's a huge landmass to take care of. As far as paving and taking care of the southern roads with $527,000, it's just nearly impossible to do. So I just thought I'd provide you with some numbers that you can review. And then on the second page, what I did was, because we do have a lot of citizens in town that have the homestead exemption, which takes 25,000 off of the appraised value right off the top. So if you went to the max at 5 mil, normally, and with 100,000, they're going to be paying 25% less per month than somebody who doesn't have homestead exemption. If they went to 80,000, it's about 31% less. If you went up to 150,000, it's about 16% less than what you would pay without the homestead exemption. So you can review that, and we can discuss it at another meeting. And if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them now.
Very helpful.
All right.
Thank you.
Did a good job on it, John.
Okay. Any other questions for the finance director? Okay, thank you, Mr. Williams. Okay, moving on to reports of our committees. Does anybody have a committee report?
Mr. Arcaro, I have a report. So on June 9th, Public Works Committee met here in council chambers. As Mr. Williams stated, we did discuss the street levy and potential increases to the current millage as a start. We also talked about the status of the current road conditions, which have improved according to the residents out there. There's still some issues that remain with dust and mud. They talked about maybe trying to remove the swale or the swale on the berm, get that removed. Concerns with maybe grading in the rain, where are we grading roads in the rain, that sort of thing. And we also talked about ARPA funds to assist with gravel roads, cost increases, fuel increases, those sort of things for the road maintenance. We also talked about the millings that we have, the city has, and also bunk gravel that's at Underridge and Center Roads, which are part of the cities, or they belong to the city. And then there was also a discussion about alternative surfacing options, which are less expensive surfacing options that one of the residents provided to us. So it was a good discussion. There have been improvements, which is positive, and we were happy to hear that. So we are going to, maybe in the work session, we'll have to discuss our current millage, what we plan on doing, how would we maybe focus money towards the gravel roads. And then we're going to have our next Public Service Committee meeting July 21st, which is a Thursday at 6 PM. And that was basically the extent of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any other committee reports? Any liaison reports?
I do have a couple things. First is the announcement that there's a Board of Tourism meeting tomorrow night, June 14th, 6:30 PM at the Port Authority Building. Also would like to let everyone know there was a Cable Advisory Board meeting on May 25th at noon at the library. A lot of things were discussed about the online videos. They're still doing well. The views kind of went down a little bit from last month. So we're always looking for opportunities to get the word out there and get those advertised. One point of interest that some people do ask is that when a video is posted on the cable channel, which usually is a Wednesday, it takes about a day to get it over to the video. So just keep that in mind if you're searching for videos. One of the main things were discussed was that there is a resignation from the board. So that is kind of sad. So if you do have an interest in it, please send a letter of interest to the city manager's office. And we will be picking a new board member. Let's see. So just to say a word of the board member that resigned, it was Matt Crawford, who, as you know, has been a longtime board member for the Cable Advisory Board. So I personally want to thank him for his service on this board. I know he does have a lot of new things going on. The Outdoor Learning Center has a lot of new happenings going on out there that takes up a lot of his time. So for me, thank you, Matt, for your service. We all as a council appreciate it very, very
Absolutely.
much. So that's all I have this evening.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else for a liaison report? Okay, hearing no, we'll move on to our ordinances and resolutions for this evening, and we have one in third reading.
Pardon me, an ordinance to repeal and replace section 509.11 of the City of Pontiac Codified Ordinances and not declaring an emergency.
Hey, Mr. Hockaday, if you want to fill in for Mr. Lewis.
Sure. This just kind of generally redresses the noise ordinance section. Previously required the officer to have a decibel meter in some cases. It was restrained to certain areas and certain types of noises, such as a barking dog rather than animals in general. So Mr. Lewis was able to redraft this to make it a little more accessible and cover a broader range of issues without kind of some needless bureaucracy around it. So I think this will suit our police officers a great deal better in terms of dealing with these types of complaints.
Any questions or comments regarding this ordinance? Is there a motion to proceed?
Mr. Arcaro, I'll make a motion to act on ordinance 39-22.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 4722. Is there a second?
Second it.
Or I'm sorry, 39.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery.
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 3922 is passed.
And thank you to Mr. Lewis for your work on this ordinance.
We'll move on to our first reading ordinances and resolutions. We have 5 to consider this evening, and we will begin with ordinance 4722.
An ordinance to authorize payment to the following contractors and the amounts listed in section 1 below pursuant to section 5705.41D1 of the Ohio Revised Code and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Williams?
These are payments or pending payments that have not had a purchase order or the line encumbered prior to the invoice. CT Consultants, that's the emergency response plan. I think there was some confusion on that one, and that's why you're seeing this additional 4,088. The gas line inspection, what can I say? It has been much more expensive than I ever anticipated. We do get reimbursed through the gas company, so that's a good thing. But on the other hand, I could anticipate that it was going to cost an additional $55,000. We're probably up to, I don't know, over 150,000 right now in inspection. So hopefully this is the last one we'll see. City manager just signed a purchase order for 75,000 just in case it does go above that. So we wouldn't have to come back to council again, and then Fireland Supply, I believe that's the Public Works Department for the guardrail. The purchase order is obtained after the fact, so. That's about it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments regarding this ordinance? There a motion to proceed?
I'll make a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 47-22.
There's a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 4722. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Hey, Ms. Ledford, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
This time I'd like to declare ordinance 47-22 an emergency.
This motion to declare ordinance 4722 an emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Hey, Ms. Ledford, the emergency has been declared.
This time I'd like to act on ordinance 47-22.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 4722. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Hey, ordinance 4722 is passed. Move on to ordinance 4822.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to award the bid and enter into contract with Koski Construction Company for the 2022 pavement repair program not to exceed a total of $626,665 and declaring an emergency.
So what this entails is the bid and award, and this includes the base bid amount and alternatives A1 and A2. We will add West Street in by change order once we enter into contract. So we will have to have council increase that amount once we're in the contract. So it's too complicated to try and add it on at the time of award. So we'll just enter into contract and change order. And Mr. Williams will have to amend this amount that's appropriated or encumbered for this. So I'm just making you all aware of that, but you don't see West Street in here, but it will be added after the fact once we enter contract. Okay.
Any questions or comments regarding this ordinance?
Mr. Arcaro, I have a question. In the the ordinance coming up, there's paving street improvement fund total 143.6. Is that for West Street or am I jumping too far ahead?
Yeah, that's the additional to cover this contract.
Okay, because it was
Because we-
626, 665. So
Yeah, because we had about little over 500,000
yeah.
allocated to paving. And then this is the additional that we can appropriate, that's certified with the county, certified revenue that we can appropriate. That'll be used to cover this contract. I believe we'll have roughly 20,000 additional after this is awarded.
So make sure if you're gonna vote for this, you vote for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions regarding this ordinance? Is there a motion to proceed?
Mr. Arcaro, I'd like to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 4822.
There's a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 4822. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Ms. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to declare ordinance 4822 an emergency.
It's a motion to declare ordinance 4822 an emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Ms. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo, the emergency's been declared.
I would like to make a motion to act on ordinance 48-22.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 4822. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
The ordinance 4822 is passed. Move on to ordinance 4922.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to advertise for bids for the Buffalo Street Sanitary Sewer Project and declaring an emergency.
Okay, you heard the city manager's summary in his report. Are there any questions or comments regarding this ordinance? Okay, is there a motion to proceed?
I'd like to make the motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 4922, Mr. Carroll.
This motion is suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 4922. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Emery, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to declare an emergency on ordinance 49-22.
This motion to declare ordinance 4922 an emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Emery, the emergency's been declared.
Mr. Carroll, I'd like to act on ordinance 49-22.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 4922. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro?
Yes.
Mr. Emery?
Yes.
Mr. Goff?
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski?
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford?
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo?
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 4922 is passed. Move on to ordinance 5022.
An ordinance to amend the 2022 budget through appropriations and fund and interfund transfers attached to 2 and marked Exhibit A.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Some of the general fund budget changes that we had are related to the fire department. The fire chief had sent out a memo and council had approved that, but this certifies it. I put $10,000 in additional fuel for the police department. It's not going to be enough. But at this time, I don't have enough certified revenue in the general fund in order to appropriate additional funding. We're probably, and I've talked to the city manager about this over the weekend, we're probably going to have to use some of those ARPA dollars as revenue replacement for the general fund because right now there's just not sufficient revenue to certify to cover some additional expenses that I think we're going to have throughout the remainder of the year. So I was able to get 10,000 in there. Part of it was reducing the line item on the loan principal for the industrial park. And part of that was we used a prior year purchase order because we did have some deferred payments through the state. So I kept that purchase order open, used that purchase order. So we're able to reduce that by 18,100 to offset the increases in fuel supplies, EMS supplies, and fuel for the fire department as well. Street department, they're really low in fuel. The max I could get for the street department at this time is 20,000. That's pretty much using up all the additional certified revenue in that department. I'll have to look at that there's ways around that, but that's the max I can do at this point. That should get them through a couple more months, maybe 3 months. Fire levy fund, we're increasing that $1,500 for the uniform allowance. The train and protective clothing are new line items within the fire levy. The paving, we discussed that, the 143,600 was the additional certified revenue that we could appropriate to cover this contract. Sewer department, they needed an additional 3,000 in uniform allowance, 10,000 in fuel, and utilities is 50,000. I know that's a big chunk of money. The Brian Bidwell, the wastewater superintendent, had sent an explanation as to why he needed an additional $50,000. There were some unpaid and outstanding utility bills at the end of 2021, which were paid out of the 2022 budget, which shorted the 2022 budget. So we have to make it up at this point. So either way, we're going to have to pay for it, but it was just an additional amount that was taken out of the 2022 budget. And then for water distribution, I had to add 10,000 in fuel for water distribution. They're just about out. And then road cut repairs, because of the price of asphalt and the number of road cut repairs that we've had to do, they needed an additional 20,000 to cover that. So it was 30,000 in distribution, 63,000 in sewer, 12,000 of the fire levy. Grand total of all of the adjustments was $269,225.
Any questions or comments? I'm sure we'll be visiting the fuel lines again with the
Right.
gouging that's going on with the fuel. Just like the citizens are, we are in the same boat,
Yeah.
except we have a much bigger fleet.
Yeah, the budgets were based upon, I don't know, $3.50, and it's just,
Well, and it started lower and has ramped up to this. So
Yeah.
if these prices sustain to the end of the year, we're going to have much bigger hits on these fuel lines come end of third and fourth quarter of this year.
Now they're making record profits, so.
Yeah.
And just with regard to ARPA too, the ARPA dollars, if we do decide to do that, or council does, for the revenue replacement, we're gonna have to first appropriate that line, appropriate money in that transfer line, then do a separate ordinance to actually transfer the money to the general fund. Once it gets to the general fund, I can recertify with the county and then we can reappropriate from there. But just wanted to give you the mechanics of it.
And to be clear, that is last year's ARPA funds distribution. And then we also have this year's ARPA funds
Right.
distribution. So
Yeah.
it's really about certified revenue and cash flow more than anything at this juncture in the game. So if we receive second half settlement, that might alleviate some of these issues, but we won't receive second half settlement until August.
Yeah, July or
You're thinking this might last a couple months though, the fuel?
I think so.
Okay.
It will be okay for a few months. It's like.
Okay, is there a motion to proceed?
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 50-22.
Okay, there's a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 50-22. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Lightford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Hey, Mr. Prokowski, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to declare an emergency for ordinance 50-22. I'd like to act on ordinance 50-22.
Okay, there's a motion to act on ordinance 50-22. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Lightford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Ordinance 50-22 is passed. Move on to ordinance 5122.
An ordinance to adopt a tentative tax budget for the year 2023, attached here to a marked Exhibit A, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Williams.
I think we might have a problem. I just noticed this. The
Uh-oh.
ordinance says to adopt a tax budget. We're setting the hearing date. We're not adopting the tax budget. Tax budget hasn't been prepared. The hearing date hasn't been, scheduled. So
Oh, yeah.
I believe we're going to have to change that to for setting a hearing date for the tax budget.
You want to just insert adopt a tentative tax budget hearing date?
Yeah, that would be fine.
We can just classify it as a Scribner's error.
Okay. That's
So that
fine.
way it doesn't have. to
Yeah, I
be
just,
amended. We don't have the law director here to advise, but that was a common thing, previous law director.
Yeah, I think you're okay with adopting it as a Scrivener's error. John Williams, do you feel okay with that?
yeah, I mean, in the body of the ordinances is a public hearing will be advertised and publicly posted and will be held on the tax budget on June, whatever. So the actual, the actual wording here, just, it does deal with the public hearing and will be advertised, but we're just not adopting it because it hasn't been prepared yet. So that'll be the final one, because if you look at the tax budget schedule, it says the hearing is set for June 27th. We have to publish it 10 days in advance of that hearing date. Then we'll have that hearing at noon in council chambers. And then when you get down to the 11th, the July 11th meeting, we'll adopt, or council will adopt the budget that time. It has to be before July 15th, and it has to be submitted to the county auditor before July 20th. So I think that this ordinance refers to is that July 11th meeting.
Seems like the body is all about the meeting, so I look good.
Whatever you're more comfortable with, we can
Yeah,
amend
whatever.
or
Yeah,
go with the Scribner's error.
It's up to council what they want to do, but it definitely needs to be the hearing date. So the wording.
Okay, but which is correct
Yes.
in the body. So I think we'll just go with the Scribner's error then.
Yep. June 27th.
Any other discussion? Is there a motion to proceed?
I'll make a motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 51-22.
There's a motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 51-22. Is there a second? Second.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, Mrs. Ledford, the three reading rule has been suspended.
This time I'd like to declare ordinance 51-22 an emergency.
So motion to declare ordinance 51-22 an emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
Okay, Mrs. Ledford, the emergency has been declared.
This time I'd like to act on ordinance 51-22.
So motion to act on ordinance 51-22. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Mr. Prokowski.
Yes.
The ordinance 51-22 is passed with the notation of the Scribner's error.
Yes.
Noted that. Okay, that completes our ordinances for this evening. Move on to unfinished and old business. Yes, business.
Mr. Carroll, I have two. First one, I would like to thank Skip Ensman and his crew for the responsibility responding to a water leak in front of Burdick's Plumbing on Harbor Street before the road was paved, so we didn't waste. And Mr. Hockaday, remind the public about the rules for golf carts in the city.
Golf carts are permitted within the city with the caveats that they're permitted on certain streets posted at, I believe, 35 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour or lesser. And that they have to go through an inspection process. If they did not come titled as a certified vehicle, they have to go through that process so they can be plated. They are required to be plated and insured, just as any vehicle traveling the roadway would be. You also bear all the same responsibilities traveling on a golf cart as you would traveling in a typical vehicle. So, seatbelts are required, time and attention rules in terms of you not being on your cell phone while operating the vehicle. Obviously can't be impaired in any way while operating that vehicle. You can be issued a DUI on it as well. So that process begins if you have an older golf cart that doesn't have any of the compliant safety equipment like windshield wipers, license plate holder and light, safety belts, and turn signals and brake lights and all those kinds of things. You can contact the Conneaut City Police Department. They have a checklist. You do have to bring it up here for inspection. There's an inspection fee. To do that, once you have that, then you can go get your golf cart or your recreational vehicle plated appropriately, and then you may operate it on those select streets.
Thank you.
Maybe we could put a little direction to that ordinance on the website.
Sure.
Okay, any other miscellaneous business? Okay, if not, need a motion to go into executive session for personnel.
Make a motion, Mr. Ricard.
A second.
Mr. Carroll,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
Excuse me, yes.
Mr. Moiseo,
Yes.
Regular meeting for June 13th, 2022 is adjourned, and we will re-adjourn after the executive session.